I'm originally from a state where it's predominantly hot year-round, and I'm not a big fan of warm weather. So when the winter comes, I like to have my windows open and spend as much time outside. Temperature averages around the 50s, but that's besides the point. It was one of those chilly winter nights. I was about 10 years old, and the only people home were my two nannies and me. They were at the other side of the house watching TV while I was in my room. It was getting late and was likely around 10 p.m., so I decided to take a shower and hop into bed. Everything's fine. I hop out of the shower and get ready for bed. At this point, I should quickly go over the layout of my room. It's rectangular shaped and has two windows facing the front door entrance to my house. From my windows, you can see a walkway to the front door, and the path is sort of gated in brick. Basically, you'd have to enter the driveway, turn left, and walk down a path that leads to my front door. My bed faces one of those windows, and I can see all the way down the path, and both windows have a mesh screen. This is where things get scary. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the window facing my bed open to let the cold air in. My room is well lit, so it's hard to see anything through the window. However, as soon as I turned off the light, I saw the figure of a man with his face pressed upon the screen. At that moment, I felt his piercing gaze. He's motionless and smiling. He had facial hair that looked as if his whole face was covered in fur, and the hair on his head was the same length. I briefly thought I was imagining this and was seeing something that wasn't there, because of all the foliage outside my window. I had taken a couple of quick steps towards the window to get a good look before I confirmed what I saw was real. This all happened in a matter of 10 seconds. I bolted out of the room and towards the room my nannies were in. The hallways in my house are narrow and long, and large windows face the entrance. I didn't dare look out. I reached the room my nannies are in and I tell them what happened. They just laughed. To be quite honest, I was a boy who cried wolf. I was always quite a prankster and a bit imaginative of a brain, so it was hard to take me seriously when I was younger, and I had to practically beg them to check with me. But from what I can remember, they took it seriously. We get back to my room and no one's there. My window screen is left untouched and the man is gone. I don't think they were totally convinced, if I'm being honest, and neither were my parents. I couldn't sleep in my room for days because of the incident, and nothing was done about it. My house didn't even have an alarm system, so there was nothing stopping this person from coming back. I'm still very disappointed in how things were handled, and I had no power over anything. I have no idea how long that guy was out there for, and if he was watching me undress and then dress myself after I showered. I remember how messed up looking his smile was. It was menacing. I'm glad that I was not harmed by this man, and that was his only visit. At least I hope. I stopped opening my windows at night, and I missed the cool winter air. It was winter 2012, and I was 18 or 19 at the time. I was working in a petrol station in an average-sized town in England. It was an okay job and good money for somebody who was at college at the time, but it was just a shame that it was a weekend job, because while my friends were getting drunk and having fun, I was in a petrol station serving taxi drivers and the occasional drunk. Anyway, back to the story. It started off just like any other night. Serve people, clean up, do stock, and the average night shift work. Since it was winter, the night was really dark and you could only see faint outlines of people walking back and forth, even with streetlights. The place where I worked was situated across the road from a pub and had an alley running beside it that led right into a housing estate. Around 3 to 4 a.m. as I finished cleaning a set of shelves, I noticed a figure standing in the alley, just out of the light, but just enough to hide his face. But you could also make out his clothing. I initially brushed it off as somebody waiting for a taxi, as it seemed harmless enough. I sat down in my chair behind the counter and looked at my phone and played some games for a bit. When I looked up, it was 5 a.m. and he was still there, waiting, watching me. To make my situation worse, after 5 there was hardly any traffic or passerbys. I had that guttural feeling that he had some harmful intent. I was safe, however, as I was locked in till morning. I stared back in a trance, trying to keep an eye on whatever he would do next. After a while, I really needed to use the bathroom, so when I went and came back thinking and hoping that he might have walked off. But he didn't, and he was still there. I then decided not to do the last of my duties for the night until my coworker came in to start their shift. As my last job was to take out the garbage and boxes, Got to about 6 a.m. and the figure faded back into the alley and I didn't see him for the rest of my shift. When my coworker arrived, it was still dark and I usually walked the 10 minutes back home. But I got a taxi home after that shift since I felt the guy could be anywhere still watching me. I told my coworkers and family members about my experience and they said they personally haven't experienced anything like it and wouldn't like to either. I was very nervous when doing shifts from then on, feeling like as soon as I let my guard down, he would strike. But thankfully, nothing else happened after that. I quit the following summer to go to university. Safe to say I don't want to meet the person in the shadows from that night. To set this up, I live in a dorm on campus at my college. I was back a week early during winter break for Greek recruitment, basically interviewing with and visiting different sororities all week, and the only people on campus were other girls and a few front desk staff. They didn't have the cleaning company, dining hall staff, or even our RAs around at all. As a result, my roommate also wasn't back because she was not rushing, and my entire floor, since it is mostly made up of exchange students from China, was empty. I was the only one on the floor and one of the few in the entire tower. There are 4 dorm towers, 12 floors each. To get up to the dorm this week, you had to check in with the front desk to get your key reactivated, and every time you wanted to go up, they would swipe to give you permission to go past the front desk. You then had to swipe to unlock the doors to the hallways containing the elevators, and again to be able to press a button, and once more to actually get into the dorm. If you didn't have a key code to a specific tower or room, you couldn't get into it. Now, I was in my room the second night of the week, settled back in and sitting on my futon, my back against one of their armrests and facing the door. The rooms are long rectangles with a window at one end and the door at the other. My bed was lofted above me and I have a blanket hanging down from there behind my head, so you essentially couldn't see me from the doorway. I was laying there with my headphones in, jumping through YouTube videos when I heard the door open. Not only is there a distinct sound of the key card going in and out the door, like a hotel door, I also still have Christmas ornaments hanging from the ceiling. I heard the door open and I knew it opened all the way because it hit an ornament and it fell off its hook. I froze in fear. I knew my roommate wasn't back and neither was my RA. Those were the only 2 people who would have access to my room. After my initial fear, my first thought was that whoever it was would realize their mistake and quickly back out. Kind of like opening an occupied bathroom stall. But as I froze, barely breathing, I heard them take 2 steps forward and even bumped my suitcase, which was taking up most of my doorway. I adjust slightly, moving to reach my phone, and my futon squeaked loudly. Instantly, I heard the footsteps retreat, the door close, and the person move away from the door. I was stuck where I was for maybe an hour until I could finally muster up the courage to turn around. There on the floor was the broken ornament and my suitcase sitting slightly ajar. I texted my roommate and RA, practically begging them to tell me that they were back, but my roommate was still in London and my RA confirmed my fear. Not only was she not back, but she also said she had no idea who would be able to get into my room. Even if the cleaning people or the maintenance guys were back, they don't have permission to go into dorms, nor any way to get in. She assured me that she would let the front desks know and also suggested it was just a spring admissions student who probably got coded the wrong key. I accepted that as an answer. They were confused, heard me move, and realized they got the wrong room. It wouldn't happen again, if that's what it was, but I struggled to sleep that night. I even felt terrified to turn around and look at the door when I woke up the next morning. But the night returned, and I, unable to sleep and very scared, was once again up late browsing Reddit. This time I had my phone close to me and had taped a piece of string over the door, since I didn't have the ornament alarm hanging anymore, and I needed to validate I wasn't going crazy. Like clockwork, once again at 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my door and the distinct use of the key card and the door open up. I stayed frozen and realized I could see their silhouette in the microwave store, which sat against the window and facing the door. They stayed in the doorway and nearly filled up the whole thing, the light from the hallway streaming around them into my dark room. Once again I was frozen, convinced they meant malice and that last night wasn't a mistake. But if they wanted me asleep, I wasn't going to let them have that. I hit play on a video I had queued up, and as soon as the ad started, the figure left and the door closed behind them, and the footsteps retreated. When I finally looked, the string was broken. I told my RA and roommate about this, as well as the front desk the next morning. All of them confirmed not only that no one else had a registered key for my floor or my tower, but even those that did weren't back yet, whether it was other students or employees. I didn't sleep the rest of the week and kept my suitcase and chair in front of the door, but it never happened again. Even now, months later, that little 9x20 room is terrifying when I am alone at night, since whoever comes through that door is only a few steps away from my bed and blocks the only way out. This incident happened to me over the Christmas holidays this past year. For reference, I'm a 24-year-old female. My cousin and I decided to go up a few hours north for a nice winter cabin weekend. It went great, nothing creepy at all. On our final day, we packed up at 6 a.m. and hopped in the car to get an early start on the 5-hour drive we had ahead of us. It was a very foggy morning. Not actively snowing, but previous snowfalls had piled up quite a bit, making the drive a little risky in the dark early hours of the morning. My cousin was driving and we were chatting and listening to podcasts, not too aware of our surroundings. We were about 20 minutes into the drive when unfortunately, the car skidded off the road a little bit. Black ice, and we very slightly grazed a tree. We got out to take a look, and by some miracle there was no damage or anything on the car. As my cousin and I started to laugh with relief, we were just thanking our luck. I shielded my eyes because of some idiot driving with their high beams coming up behind us. So obnoxious, my cousin laughed, starting to open her door to step back in, when the blinding headlights car honks and continues to keep at it as they approach us. My cousin and I looked at each other super confused, but quickly hops back in the car. The car begins to slow down and we're able to see a man in the driver's seat, and he finally takes his hand off of his horn and pulls up right next to my cousin's car. He rolls down his window and motions for my cousin to roll down ours. Figure it's fine because he's still inside the car and we're in ours. I know, probably still a stupid move. Hey there, ladies. In a rush this morning. He laughs. Not really. Just trying to get home. Can we help you with something? My cousin replies. Totally stone cold poker face. Oh no, I just noticed you dropped something about 2 kilometers back. It fell out of your trunk. My cousin turns to look at me. Did you shut the trunk when we left? Yeah, dude, obviously, I said. And knowing the way the car is shaped, we would have seen and definitely heard an open trunk. No thanks, sir. I think you might have us mixed up with someone else, my cousin said and immediately rolled up her window. This man just gave off bad vibes. He starts blaring his horn again and motioning for us to roll down the window. My cousin rolls it down once again and sees him holding up some women's underwear and smiling. See, this look familiar. I can literally remember the exact tone with which he said that. No thank you, sir. You have a great day now. My cousin quickly rolled up her window again and floored it, quickly hopping back on the road, and thankfully the man was either taken aback or just gave up and we didn't see him for the next hour or so. My cousin and I were a little bit shaken up by this, but we tried to laugh it off since we were safe now and we hadn't seen his car follow us or anything. A little while later into our trip, we got off at an exit to fill up gas and grab some breakfast at a Starbucks. My cousin and I mobile ordered and I was going to quickly run in to grab our food and drinks. And it started snowing at this point, and while the sun had been up for a little bit, it was still foggy and gloomy, making it hard to see the surroundings. I ran in and as I reached for our food, someone's arm reached over mine to grab a napkin and I instantly flinched back. When I looked up, I truly almost shit myself. It was that same man. Look at us, just like old friends, he smiled at me. I immediately looked down, grabbed my food and started walking out of the store. As I left, I heard him talking to the barista saying, See that beauty queen? That's my beauty queen. I almost had tears in my eyes because I was so terrified. I power walked to the car, almost tripping outside because I was so scared, not walking like a normal person. Hopped in the screamed, we need to get the hell back on the road. He's inside the Starbucks. My cousin started laughing and thinking I was pranking her, but she quickly realized that was not the case, and the man walked out of the Starbucks a few seconds later, with no drink or food in hand, walking straight towards our car, waving at us. My cousin quickly started to turn the car on when the man reached into his pocket. I genuinely thought he might have been pulling out a weapon, but instead he was holding up the underwear he had before. Thankfully, my cousin took no time in backing out of there and speeding back onto the highway. We both were freaking out at this point, Not sure how he ended up at the same stop as us, despite us not seeing him behind us at all. Could have taken some sort of back roads that we didn't know about, but it would have taken him much longer than us to get there. Unless he was trailing behind. I don't know. We quickly tried to find an alternate route on our Maps app, and thankfully, there was one that made us go through some local roads, which we hoped might help. Of course, with our luck though, as we were going through a smaller town, I felt the car getting gradually lower on my side. We pulled over at a well-lit gas station and realized that we were losing air in one of the tires. We were both too scared to get out, but figured if we went out together, it might be less scary. So we did, and we filled up the tire with some air, and it seemed to be okay. We got back into the car to warm up, and everything seemed fine until 10 minutes later, when this car seemed to appear out of nowhere directly behind us. My cousin and I looked at each other, having no idea what to do if it was the man. Our suspicions were confirmed when he blared his stupid horn yet again, then quickly swerved off the road to get right next to us. This time he was on my side. He had his window rolled down and was screaming at us. At this point, I gave zero shits and called my brother-in-law, who's a cop. He told us to drive directly to the nearest police station and to call them right away so they would be alert. Literally as he was instructing me, the creep got out of his car, just stopped on the side of the snowy, icy road. We were speeding away, so it quickly got harder and harder to see him. From what I could make out, he was just sitting on the hood. My cousin and I did not want to stop or do anything. With about an hour left in our journey, we decided to just book it straight home, and thankfully that was the end of that. I know we made a lot of stupid mistakes that could have potentially had horrible consequences, but I'm super happy we made it out alive and unharmed. I still don't know how he caught up to us, seemingly magically, and why he just sat there at the end. But I don't even want to find out at this point. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent and food for 9 months or so, before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now my parents are super chill and they gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks, they had just recently moved about 40 miles south of a major Midwest city. It's certainly not ideal, but I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work to pass the time and to save up some money. Anyway, so summer turned into winter and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay much and was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup, but again, since my parents live in the middle of nowhere, Midwest, think of acres and acres of farms. I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said if I just paid him $200 a month and helped him clean up, he basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction-type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned, also other various drills and even generators or other low-level construction farming equipment that someone in that area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom-and-pop type thing where everyone knew everyone and the office only opened on days that when someone was coming by, and was generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I had minored in a business-adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date, and if there was a payment plan in place, maybe answering an email or two and discussing prices and availability, etc. It was a super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about, I think, 90 years old and at the top of this little hill. And the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it cheap. Cleared out the bar and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased and work any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done. So if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple of days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1 o'clock, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out into the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window, and once or twice I saw a family of deer or a raccoon scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred or if something fell off, I would definitely notice it. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in case the roads were that bad, but I had an old SUV, and more than that, I just really wanted to get out of the house, so I went into work anyways at about 8 p.m., and I was going to stay until just after 1 o'clock. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill when I was working, since, believe me, when I said that nobody ever showed up at night, since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road, you had to be only coming to our specific building, probably know it was there beforehand. It was a locals-only type of thing, and very small. Since the family had inherited a lot of money, we're pretty sure at least, and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy and I'm having some coffee, and I kept glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish street light reflected onto the ground at the gate. It was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool and pretty way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business. Then I came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 more minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like it must have been a huge dog or substantial animal that had just rolled around on the ground there, on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, or possibly when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed a big dog or maybe even a farm animal had gotten loose and maybe was attracted to the light or something. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning I was leaving and, as always, got out of my car to lock the gate up. And to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. But when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up, it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this when I was a kid, and I'm pretty sure most of you probably did too. So I 100% knew for sure that's what it was. It was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid. It was from a very large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and saw what I already knew, that whoever had made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now, I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom, so I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing cold and snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then do a snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in front of my desk window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building. So it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely freaked out now, once I realized that someone had just been this close to me, secretly in the middle of the woods. And I looked around but didn't see anything amiss at all. And now I just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back into my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in like 4 hours and might see the snow angel and assume I did it, since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young and felt like I might be made fun of by him if nothing else. They were all manly men, if you know what I mean. So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over and kicked the snow around so it hid the angel, locked it up again and went back to my car. Also, I should note, this is what really happened at this moment, but I almost lied here and said something else since it seems fake. Since I assumed the average person wouldn't get back out of their SUV and not just flee in their car because they'd be embarrassed about a snow angel. But at that time, I was pretty insecure and I cared a lot about what others thought, so fortunately this is what I did. Also, I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird and could have been an illegal hunter, even though hunting at night in the cold didn't make much sense. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier and I assumed they were long gone. But that's when I heard it. When I was getting into my SUV, there was the loudest high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in the Wizard of Oz or something. Like something was doing it fake on purpose to show that they weren't scared of me, or to see how I would react once I knew they were laughing at me on our property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all, since, other than the streetlight I was under, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped. Then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for just like 5 seconds, listening in a panic. Now, I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night, with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logistically rule that out. But to me, it honestly felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake, scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it certainly worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately filled with adrenaline, got in my car, and drove the hell away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out, and I even told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it out, we all decided it was one of two things. It was either my brain somehow convinced itself that the snow formation was angel-shaped, when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing was just a coyote or red fox. Though I don't think that's what it was. What I truly believe is the second thing, which is that some local was out walking around for some reason and decided to mess with me. I didn't have any close friends left in the area that would do this, and if they would, they certainly would have barred up to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that the nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means whomever it was went out into the woods at night in the freezing cold just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or family history of them. Didn't do drugs. Sometimes I drank socially at that time, but certainly didn't that night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I feel like someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue. Though I knew where my boss kept his gun and always made sure it was there when I started my shift. But I certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited around for me to leave for at least 2 hours just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try to find him and attack him or something. Yet he didn't seem scared or to care while he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story he tells from his point of view to make all of his friends giggle hysterically. But for me, that dude, the one I call Angel in the Snow guy, the one with the laugh I'll never forget. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve of 2020. I was out running a Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger, and he has all of his belongings. Several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not very big. We get all this stuff loaded up barely, and we are on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. Apparently he couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now in my city, we have a street that is well known for having vices, hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels, the works. We get there, and he asks me to wait for him to check in and get his key. Hey, no problem, man, I said. I'll confess, I break the rules a little bit when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people who have tried to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of crazy other things. But like I said, another time. This motel was on the street I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere, and there was a dude in the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against the building. I'll be the first to admit, I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key, and the whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his store. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload it. While on my second trip of getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. He came up to the room I was next to, not my passenger. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw that guy raise a freaking shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following this, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting, and I was just waiting for the shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "Hey, I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And then he gave me an additional cash tip. Didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill in my pocket at first. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going on down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I know the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun, so I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops, and I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out of Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night, and the cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women. They never answered the door I saw them come out of, and the occupants of the room they went into said that nothing happened and that I was full of shit. Well, I know what I saw. This event happened in January of 2013. I was then a 17-year-old guy living in Portland, Oregon. Throughout high school, I was always very active in cycling. I would often find myself cycling in the early morning and late at night, either coming back from school or from a friend's house. Didn't have a driver's license yet, so cycling was the only viable option for me if the weather permitted it. I lived in a safe area of the city and I had good lighting, so I was never afraid of cycling in the dark. However, one night during my senior year of high school, this would all change. The distance from my school to my house was around 6 kilometers sticking to main roads, but about 4 kilometers taking a shortcut through a nice wooded park. I had finished a long music rehearsal and I was tired. It was already 10:40 p.m. and I was feeling extremely exhausted. I decided to take the shortcut home. Although the park can be very scary due to the lack of lighting, I have taken that shortcut before at dark. During the summer, there is usually some crowd still at the park, but this was winter and the park was a very different feeling being completely dark with no one around. At around 10:50 or so, I took a left turn from a lit road into the wooded park. Already the scenery went from serene to frightening. I could get through it in around 10 minutes. However, halfway through the dark area, I happened to run into two guys wearing dark-colored hoods. Aside from the fact that they were not wearing reflective clothing, they looked threatening and scary. Could not see their faces very well until I was within 20 meters from them. As I passed them, I heard them quietly talking about something. Suddenly, both guys pull out large knives from their jackets. My heart immediately sank and my adrenaline started to kick in. One of the guys starts to yell curse words at me, and both charge at me wielding their knives. I was preparing for the worst and thinking that I could end up dead and dumped somewhere. Fortunately for me, I was able to see a path that led to a lit street, and I quickly cycled fast out of there. Normally my legs would get tired since it was a good 400 meters to the busy road. As I got into the lit road, I saw some light traffic and immediately felt much safer. About 15 seconds later, the two guys walked out and pretended not to see me. I let out a sigh of relief as they went the opposite direction that I went. As I checked my iPhone for the time, another feeling of dread hit me, as the time on my phone showed 11:15 p.m. My immediate reaction was, what the hell? Was I really in that park for more than 20 minutes? It felt so much shorter than 25 minutes with how panicked I was. I quickly cycled home and eventually reached there about 5 minutes later. I ended up not telling my parents about this as I would get in very serious trouble with them. After a few days, the horrifying thought of almost being murdered in a desolate park started to vanish from my mind. I never went through that park at night again, and I didn't even go through that park for a few months after that period. Just a week later, some very horrific news ended up shocking my neighborhood. A very popular junior from my high school was violently stabbed and killed in a brawl. Him and his friends were doing some shopping at a store when 3 male teenagers started to cause some trouble and stole some items. When he confronted the 3 guys, they started getting violent and a large fight broke out between them. The guys ended up stabbing the poor boy multiple times and was rushed to the hospital. Sadly, he succumbed to his injuries. He was on the football and basketball teams in my school and was a very kind-hearted person in general. His death devastated the entire community. A few days afterwards, I come to read the news and I was met with horror and disgust. 2 of those 3 teenagers were the exact same guys I encountered at the park late at night. Despite both only being 18 years of age, they looked like they were at least in their late 20s. Those 3 teenagers were quickly identified by many of my schoolmates as they graduated a different high school the year before, but were very active on social media. I don't know what would have happened if I wasn't athletic and wasn't able to outrun those hooded guys. I've been in fights and beaten up before, but I'd never been so scared for my life before this incident. A few years ago, when I still lived in upstate New York, something really freaky happened to me. If you've ever been there during the winter, you know that it snows a lot. I usually just spent snowy nights watching TV. I lived about a mile or so from any other house, and a roommate was out. Now, I'll be honest, being alone made me feel uncomfortable. I've always had an overactive imagination, and a small noise could really freak me out. Like I was saying, my roommate was out, and it was snowing heavily. It was probably like 9 or 10 at night, and I was watching TV like normal. All of a sudden, I heard a crunch outside, like someone stepping on ice. I immediately tensed up, and my mind raced to every possibility. It wasn't my roommate since I didn't hear a car. I listened in horror as I could hear the crunches getting louder. I ran into my room and locked the door. I got out my shotgun and I grabbed my phone ready to call 911 just in case. I know it might seem like I was overreacting, but remember, this is at night in heavy snow, miles away from any other house. Who could possibly be outside? The footsteps just stopped at some point. I eventually fell asleep, and when I woke up, my roommate was back. I went outside to see if I could find any evidence of who was outside, and what I found still haunts me. I saw footprints in the snow coming out of the woods and circling around my house. The footprints were filled in for the most part, so it was hard to figure out where they were going. The scariest part of all this is that the footprints stopped outside of my bedroom window. The other footprints were filled in, but these were fresh, as if someone had been standing there all night, since the snow stopped early in the morning. To this day, it still scares me. I don't know what kind of person would be out in those woods. The fact that I was in my room while they were standing outside my bedroom window still freaks me out. I moved out of that house a few months later. We moved to Connecticut the summer before I entered 6th grade, so 2001, to a beautiful new house in one of the most beautiful towns. A bit more rural than we're used to in New Jersey, but it was an adjustment. My sister is 2 years younger than me, so was going into 4th grade at the time. It's relevant, by the way, to the story. We came from a neighborhood where we were all super close and everyone knew one another. Block parties every summer, kids running back and forth to one another's houses, and we were sad to leave it. Within the first weeks, we met some of our neighbors, and everyone was what we soon defined as very Connecticut. In particular, our neighbors directly across the street seemed a bit odd. The mom would come over to vent to my mom about her sons and husband, or ex-husband. We couldn't really figure it out at the time, and my mom was a sweetheart and was very welcoming and warm. The holidays came around, and the neighbor boy across the street that was in my sister's 4th grade class, my sister came back slightly alarmed with what happened in class that day. The students were asked to make a Thanksgiving turkey out of a trace drawing of their hands. On each finger, they were to write the things they were thankful for. The neighbor wrote things like being a loser, hating myself, etc. Extremely dark things for a 4th grader. Fast forward to Christmas, and my mom hears that they have nowhere to go for the holidays, so she politely invites the mother and 2 sons to our annual Christmas Eve party. The boys were really strange. They listened to Japanese techno with headphones on and just spoke to nobody. They headed straight to our basement to play video games. It was weird. The younger one was always much stranger than the older one, and the mom would always open up to my mom and aunt, who worked with special needs students, about how he would hurt himself and how he needed to be put in special needs programs, but that he could never quite be diagnosed. They thought he was kind of on the spectrum at first, but that quickly proved to not be the case. We always assumed she'd been confiding in them because my aunt was experienced with special needs kids, and that she was looking for advice. The Christmas Eve stand out to me because they were at our home in a very intimate setting, but we saw them on a daily basis. My sister and I would come home from school telling my mom about how weird the younger neighbor boy was, that something was off. I'll never forget her telling us, "Just be nice to him, you don't know what he is capable of." That struck me as so odd at the time, but we just listened. I don't know if his mother told my mom something that scared her and made her say it, or she just had a gut instinct. Recently after that, and I can't quite remember if this was middle school or high school, I believe it was 9th grade, and my sister and younger neighbor were both in 7th, so we all rode the bus together. What my mom said stuck out in my mind, so today I decided to be friendlier than usual. There was snow on the grounds, and younger neighbor boy was drawing something in it and muttering to himself, some sort of gibberish that I had no idea about. But anyways, I decided to greet him. "Hey Adam, good morning." No eye contact from him. He just looked at me and said, "I'll bomb you," making no eye contact. Okay, so we let it slide, and we came home and told my mom. She reiterated, "Just be nice, we don't know what he's capable of." Keep in mind, we were kids. We didn't know what to take seriously and what not to. I wish we would have done more. Also keep in mind he wasn't someone who was bullied or made fun of. He was just always off in the sense that he could not hold eye contact or a conversation, or even a simple hello. Kids didn't make fun of him, and he was a loner, but it seemed to be by choice. I didn't know why we were cautious and afraid around him, other than the fact that he showed zero warmth and zero humanity. We knew he had special needs, so we never really second-guessed anything and just tried to be as polite as possible. When the bus would drop us off at all of our houses, he would run all the way up his driveway on the hill with his hands by his sides, and then turn around and kind of make a hiss noise down at everyone, making claws with his hands. It was always so odd, but again, we were kids, and there are always a couple of kids in school who were a little strange. We just took it as that. But they were invited to several Christmas Eves, so my memories kind of blend here. One year the neighbor mom started screaming at my innocent grandmother for being a Yankees fan, because she was a Red Sox fan. It was beyond strange because my grandma is the cutest little lady of all time and was in no way trying to argue over sports. It was as though the woman clearly had a weird switch go off. She was always nice to me, but I'll be honest, we rolled our eyes every time my mom invited them. It was always such forced conversations with her as a teenager. I wanted nothing to do with being cornered into another chat. I think she just must have been lonely. The following year and the final year they were invited to Christmas Eve was when she got into it with my mom about having guns in the house. The boys only attended the first couple of Christmas Eve, so it was just the mama's time around. Topic of guns came up. The neighbor mom started telling my mom about how she has guns in the house and how she takes her younger boy out to the shooting range all the time. My mom said that she didn't agree with having guns in the house, but wasn't trying to argue. Our neighbor suddenly got out of hand about it, very defensive and ultimately getting aggressive about how she grew up in New Hampshire, and that was just the way of life there. Our neighbor told us how brilliant her younger neighbor boy was, and that he had hacked into some of the government's highest levels of security, and that the CIA showed up on his doorstep. We absolutely have no idea if the story is true or not, but this is just what she told us. So it became our ongoing joke when anything strange happened at her house. Like, there would be a few things odd throughout the years. Maybe our internet had clearly been messed with, lights would flicker in the house, and we would just joke that it was the young neighbor boy each time. It wasn't until December 14th, 2012 that we knew just what he was capable of. I was out of college, working outside of Philadelphia, with my sister still a student in college, and my youngest brother a student at the high school. The worst day of all of our lives. My dad heard the gunshots in the morning that killed the neighbor mom, Nancy Lanza. He assumed there had been a hunter in the area, maybe a little closer than usual. Until the police showed up and he had to evacuate the house as snipers lined our driveway. My mom was at the mall and we were all frantically calling one another as the news broke slowly throughout the day. At first, they had his identity wrong and said it was his brother, but we knew it had to have been him. Thank God for my mom making sure we were as nice as possible, although I don't know that it would have stopped him. I wish we would have done more at the time. I wish we knew to do more at the time, but we didn't. We didn't want to assume the worst out of someone, but I wish we would have. 20 students, 6 teachers, killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School that day. The worst act of evil I've ever experienced so directly in my life, and I hope I will never experience again. I'm thankful that we survived growing up across the street from him, but unfortunately, or those who did not get so lucky, kids. Those little kids, in a place that should be the safest haven for them in their youth. I hate it so much. When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this one was the one that stood out. In the late 1960s, John was traveling by train from his village to another to visit his family. He had to change trains at one point and was dropped off at what amounted to a platform and a hut in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else in the station, and other than a dirt road that led off in the surrounding woods, there was nothing there. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker, and just about time he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat. An old woman appeared out of the twilight. She asked if he was waiting for such and such train, and when he said he was, she said it wouldn't be long until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night and offered him a meal and room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from a station. Lodging with locals was more or less the standard when traveling in this part of the USSR. And great-uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform, so he was glad to accept her offer. He took a suitcase and they set off together down the dirt road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2. And by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story house, John was extremely tired and hungry. They went inside and the woman lit some oil lamps and warmed some borscht for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realize that the old woman was actually a man. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping. She led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, however, and said goodnight, and she closed the door. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called to her, but she didn't answer. He heard nothing else. Figuring he would deal with it in the morning and that she probably had done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down and lay on the bed, deciding to make the best of it and get some sleep. Before he could fall asleep, though, he felt the urge to pee and got out of bed, hoping to find a chamber pot or something he could pee in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that's where the pot would be if there was one. Instead, he found a body. "Nope," great-uncle John said, and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way. But it was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was probably a dead man. But if he broke the window and tried to get away, there was a good chance that the old woman, and who knows who else is there, would hear him and come into the room before he could get away. So he did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress, and covered it with the blanket, then got under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs and then toward the room. The lock clicked, and the knob turned slowly. In the gloom, John saw someone move toward the bed. Then he heard several terrific and sickening thuds. The person had bashed the body off the bed with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor right in front of John. There was silence. Then the person went out of the room and the door was shut again. The footsteps went down the stairs, and then was silence again. John then moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar, and was able to slowly pry the window open. Didn't say, but I imagine he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw a suitcase out, then dove through, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind. Thankfully, he landed without too much injury and began to run into a field behind the house towards some lights in the far distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it, and he was able to get a ride to another village where he could catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what happened to the authorities, since at that time in the USSR, there was a distinct chance he would have been the one who'd got in trouble. He just thanked God he escaped and decided that the next time he traveled to visit relatives, he would take another way. A few years ago on Christmas Eve, my friend Frank and I were driving around. Pretty sure we were just getting some last-minute shopping done. At one point, we stopped by a CVS to get some cards. By this time, it was pretty dark outside. On our way out, we were stopped by a heavy-set woman who was waiting by the entrance. She asked if there was any way we could give her a ride down the street. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have immediately said no and come up with some excuse about how I needed to be somewhere else ASAP. I just don't let random strangers into my car. This world is too crazy now. But given that it was Christmas Eve and it was snowing pretty hard, I decided to help. She got in the back seat and said she lived just down the street, not even 5 minutes away. Before I headed in that direction, I drove across the street to the bank. Not that I need to inform her, but while I was at the ATM drive-thru, I was just explaining that I needed to get some money out, and then we'll head towards her home. That's when shit got awkward real fast. She asked me if I'd be able to let her borrow some money until she gets paid again. I glanced over at Frank real quick, who looked like he wanted to just start cracking up, but held it in. We literally picked this lady up 2 minutes ago, and she's asking to borrow money as if she's a friend. All I could say was, "Excuse me," but she just asked again like it was no big deal. I followed up by asking her how I knew I would get my money back with no contact info. Then she replied saying she'll give me her cell phone number, but that it's shut off right now and it'll be on next week. I honestly just wanted to laugh so hard. Did she honestly think I was going to believe this crap? So I took another $20 out of the ATM. I definitely really wasn't planning on giving it to her, but I had it in my wallet and told her I'd give her the money when we got to her house. Once we were on the main road, I asked for directions, but she decided to change her mind. She didn't want to go home anymore. Instead, she wants to go to her friend's house. This was getting too suspicious, and I really just wanted to pull over and tell her to get the hell out of my car. But I kept driving and followed her new directions. Wherever she took us was far out of my way. It was about 15 minutes from the original destination, and it was mostly side roads that we were taking. Wasn't too familiar with the area, and I could tell we were pretty much in the ghetto. She finally had me pull over and said right here is fine. Wasn't exactly sure what house belonged to her so-called friend because there were a few on the left side of the street. And to the right was a cemetery, which was kind of freaky in itself. I waited for her to thank me or say something, literally anything, and finally get the hell out of my car. But she just sat in the back seat with an awkward smile on her face. I looked back and asked if she was waiting for her friend to come out. She quickly said, "No, I'm just waiting for my money." I looked at Frank again, and we were both pretty stunned by her answer. I wasn't about to let some stranger I just helped talk to me like I owe her something. So I told her I'm not giving her the money, and if she needs help, she can ask her friend. She started getting loud, demanding that I give her the money that I promised her. This shit was just getting crazy, and I just wanted this psycho out of my car. I looked out of my window, and by this point there were other people in the street and on the sidewalk. I'm not sure if these people just happened to be outside, or if they heard her yelling, or hell, if she had something planned. But my mind was racing. I couldn't think straight, and she wouldn't stop. I realized these people outside were getting closer to my car. Then I heard the front door handle try to open. Some man was outside my window yelling, asking what's going on. So I finally just took the $20 out of my wallet and threw it at her. She grabbed it up and instantly left my car, then took off running. I got out of that neighborhood as fast as I could. When we found the main road, I felt a little bit better, but I was pissed that I just got played by some lady. I didn't even care about the $20 because I already knew that I wasn't getting it back. But mark my words, I'll never give another stranger a ride again. The story took place when I was 23 years old, close to 10 years ago. I was living in upstate New York in a very rural area with my ex-boyfriend and his family. He and I used to argue quite a bit. One morning before he went to work, he and I got into a very heated argument, but during this particular fight, he acted majorly juvenile. He jumped out of bed and flipped me the bird and yelled, "If you don't like it so much, then why don't you go back to the effing Bronx?" That was all the promising I needed. I threw on my Uggs and my winter jacket, grabbed my cigarettes, and flew out of the house. I'm unfortunately an impulsive ass and didn't think to grab my cell phone before I stormed out. Didn't drive, so my only option was to walk. I don't think at the time that I intended to walk back to the Bronx, as it was a 3-hour car ride upstate, but I just need to go for an angry, dramatic walk. I realized once I got to this road, the entrance of the trailer park, that I had no idea where anything really was around me, as I only lived there a few months at that point, and I really didn't go out a lot. I banked left and just walked and walked to where I knew civilization was. I found myself walking alongside a very busy stretch of road with 18-wheelers flying by, spraying me of slushy snow and soaking my shoes. I then saw my boyfriend driving by on his way to work, and he sped up as he drove past me, evidently still angry about our fight. I thought for sure he was going to turn around at some point, but he never came back. I pressed on, deciding instead to try to walk to my best friend's mother's house, which I knew to be in the same town. It started to snow and I was losing momentum. I passed by a VFW where a nondescript pickup truck was parked in the drive. It wasn't until I had passed it that I'd even realized the driver was in the front seat. He called out to me, "Hey honey, do you need help?" My stomach churned, realizing I would have to accept the stranger's offer. I approached his truck slowly and tried to weigh out my options. He was a clean-cut, seemingly normal older white guy, with gray hair and greenish blue eyes. Just average. I blurted out, "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" And cringed at myself for asking such a dumbass question. He answered, "Ha, I'm a good guy. I wouldn't tell you if I was a bad guy." I ignored the bells going off in my head and I got in the front seat with him. As we drove, I realized I had no clue where my friend's mom actually lived. I only knew the name of the road she lived on, but it spanned a good distance, so it wasn't very helpful in terms of finding it. I asked to borrow his cell phone so I could try calling my best friend to ask her where the heck I was going. I called her 3 times and she didn't answer because she didn't recognize the number. I started to feel inexplicably hopeless. After a few minutes, he asked me where I was from and why I was out in the middle of nowhere in the snow wearing pajamas. I explained that I was originally from the Bronx and that I had gotten into a fight with my boyfriend. He paused and said, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in making a little bit of money, would ya?" I chuckled nervously and said, No thanks though." He responded, "Well, I just figured since you're from the Bronx." I was now realizing at that point that I was almost definitely in deep shit. I muttered, "Oh, sure." He then eyed me up and down and laughed to himself before sneering. Sure, she says." I started to panic big time, but knew I couldn't show my fear. I scoured the scenery for a pillowy snowbank that I could land in if I leapt out of the truck, but to no avail. The houses were so few and far in between, I became certain this would be how I met my demise. I'll never know why, but it was at this point that he decided to ask me who I was going to see. I quickly blurted out my best friend's mom name and her husband's full name. He instantly perked up and explained that he knew the husband, and how they used to snowmobile together 20 years ago. I felt the greatest wave of relief when he explained that he knew exactly where his old buddy lived. When we finally pulled up to that big yellow house, it was like arriving to the promised land. I asked for his name. "Steve," he said, then asked for mine. I actually gave him a fake name and spat out a bullshit thank you, and then I ran as fast as I could from his truck to the porch. I crashed to the front door without knocking and I locked it behind me. I immediately started crying and running through the house trying to find my friend's mom. I had awoken her from a sound sleep, but she didn't say a word about it upon seeing how shaken up I was. Once I knew I was safe with her, I explained everything. The weird guy and his sexual proposition, and she listened, horrified and curious at the same time. She made me promise to never do anything so reckless again and that if I ever needed help to call her. She told me she would ask her husband about him when he got home, about this Steve guy, and find out more about him. I returned to my boyfriend's later that same day and I got really stoned to try to forget about the events of that morning. The following day, my friend's mom called me to tell me that Steve was a dangerous person who her husband had to cut off communication with years ago. The last he had heard about Steve was that he had been arrested for some sort of sexual assault. She then went on to point out how incredibly easy it would have been for him to hurt me and leave me just about anywhere on some lonely stretch of road, and no one would ever know where to look for me. Not to mention, I might not have even been found until the snow thawed out. I work at a popular retail store in a mall close to my on-campus apartment. I was home for Christmas break and decided to work Christmas Eve since I was promised time and a half. I could use the money to buy some extra Christmas presents. My childhood home is not very far from my apartment, but it's about an hour drive from my work. Our holiday hours were extended this year and I was given a closing shift for Christmas Eve. Store closed at 10 p.m. and the closing shift ended at 10:30, meaning that I would be getting home around midnight after swinging through a drive-thru to grab something to eat. The closing shift at the store usually had 2 employees and a manager working, but the other employee that was supposed to close with me was out sick, so it was just me and the manager. While the manager emptied and counted the cash drawers and wrote the daily report, I gathered up all the trash and cardboard and left it all by the back door in the stockroom. I dusted and vacuumed until the manager was finished with the daily report. Then he put in the combination to disable the alarm and held open the back door for me to take the trash out and cardboard. This was the part that was usually the most helpful, to have 2 employees instead of 1, because the dumpster was walled off and the manager had to wait by the door to make sure no one walked into the store. But the dumpster wasn't too far away and I wanted to get home as soon as possible, so I carried all the trash out. Our store shared the dumpster with only 3 other stores, all of which closed either before us or after us, so I wasn't expecting to see anyone at the dumpster. I was so startled that I dropped my bags when I saw someone digging through the trash. He looked up at me when he heard the bags fall. "Oh, hi. I dropped my wallet in the trash. Could you help me grab it?" he asked. 1,000 red flags went off in my brain and I immediately began to back away. I don't think I can. I need to take out the trash and get back to my store," I said, trying to walk towards the store slowly. "Which store do you work at?" he asked. I'm not sure why I told him, but I told him the store I worked at and he nodded. "Oh, nice store. You could just leave the bags here. I'll toss them when I'm done looking." I went back into the store at that point, a little creeped out but not suspecting anything else. I told my boss what happened and he laughed a little bit and offered to walk me to my car, as I parked in the lot behind the store and he was parked in the parking garage attached to the main mall. I declined and I walked to the nearly empty parking lot. There were only 3 cars in the parking lot, including mine. 1 car was parked close to the back entrance of a neighboring restaurant, and the other car was parked just a few spots away from mine. I couldn't see the person inside, but the car was on and it looked like the person was trying to warm up the car from the inside before scraping off the ice on the windshield. I glanced at the car a few times just to mentally jot down the make and model of the car. It was a blue Honda Accord. Before getting into my car and locking the doors, I called my parents to let them know that I was just now leaving and that I would be stopping to grab dinner on the way home. I kept my eyes peeled for the different fast food joints on the side of the highway, but the majority of them were closed as it was 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I was getting hungrier and hungrier as I got closer and closer to the exit of my house. I decided to just scrounge up some leftovers at home as I drove through my town when I saw a Subway with blinking lights on that said, "Open late." I peeled into the parking lot of the Subway and saw the red LED sign indicating that it was open. I walked into the sandwich shop and took a look around as it was pretty empty. I called out to the empty store and was able to get the attention of the only person working in the store. "I thought I locked the door. We just closed," he said. "Oh man, please come on. I just got off work and I just want to grab something to eat before I go to bed. I'll be really quick, I promise," I begged him. I felt bad, but he sighed and agreed, probably taking pity at how exhausted I looked. We talked for a little bit about working the late night shift on Christmas Eve as he made my sandwich before a group of teenage boys walked into the store. "Hey, we're closed, guys. I'm going to lock the store after I'm done making her sandwich," he said. "But I want a sandwich," one of the boys whined. Fine. The Subway employee got out from behind the counter and locked the door so no one else would be able to get in, and he could ensure that the teenagers would be his last customers of the night. He finished making my sandwich and left me to pick out my drink and chips at the soda fountain, and the Subway employee disappeared into the back. I put the lid to my cup on and was looking for a straw when something caught my eye. The man from the dumpster was waiting in the parking lot next to my car. It was that blue Honda Accord. I really started to freak out at that point. There was no reason for this guy to be in my town an hour away from the mall at the exact place I decided to stop if he wasn't following me. And what was he doing on the hood of his car? It was the day before Christmas and it was snowing and well below 30 degrees. "Hey, can you guys walk me to my car?" I asked the group of boys. "Yeah, you all right?" one of the boys asked. "Oh yeah, I'm fine. I just don't want to slip on any ice." I lied, obviously. I felt a little silly saying that because there was probably a perfectly good reason for the man from a dumpster to be in the parking lot, something that didn't have anything to do with me, but I was super nervous still. The boys walked me to my car and waited until I drove off. The man didn't even look at me as I got into my car. I had about 10 minutes until I got to my house, and I tried to shake the weird feeling I got about the man in the dumpster. It took me a while to notice, but I realized that there was someone following me. It was hard to see because the car's lights were off, but I noticed the car when I glanced in my rear view mirror as I drove under a street light. I started to get nervous again, and I drove past my house and turned back onto the main road, hoping I would lose this guy. This guy stayed on my tail, and I watched my mirror as we went under a streetlight again. It was that same blue Honda Accord. I pulled out my phone and called 911 and explained the situation to the dispatcher. The dispatcher advised me to drive to the nearest police station and told me she would inform the police station of what was going on. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until I pulled into the police station. The Honda Accord drove past the station. There was a police car waiting outside the station, and I drove after the guy, but ultimately there was nothing they could do besides give him a ticket for driving with his lights off. My description of the man by the dumpster matched the driver of the Accord. I don't know what he had planned, but I haven't seen him since and told my boss about the incident, so I won't have to take the trash out on my own anymore.